The judge pointed at his dog tags. "Remove them." Now. The courtroom waited for him to obey. But when the colonel stepped forward and read what was engraved on the metal, the room went completely silent. Because some names are never supposed to be spoken aloud. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments, what city and country are you watching from today? Emmett Vance sat in the back row of the federal courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia. His hands rested on his knees, steady but tense. He was 47 years old, but his eyes looked much older. His hair was cut short, military style, even though he hadn't worn the uniform in 6 years. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, the kind most people wouldn't notice, but the kind that anyone who'd seen combat would recognize immediately. The courtroom was cold. The air conditioning was running too high, and Emmett's shoulders were slightly hunched forward. He had no lawyer. He was representing himself. People found that strange, but Emmett preferred silence. He would speak when it was time to speak. The morning had started differently. Emmett had woken up at 05:30 hours, like he did every morning. Old habits. He'd made coffee in his small apartment in Springfield, just outside the city. The place was sparse. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a single photograph on the wall. The photograph showed 12 men in desert camouflage, standing in front of a Black Hawk helicopter. They were smiling. Emmett was in the middle, younger, his face not yet marked by the lines that now defined it. Most of the men in that photograph were dead. Emmett had dressed carefully that morning. A gray button-down shirt, dark jeans, black boots, and the dog tags. Always the dog tags. He'd put them on slowly, feeling the weight of the metal against his chest. 2 tags on a steel ball chain. One was his. The other belonged to someone else. Someone whose name was no longer in any official record. The drive to the courthouse had taken 40 minutes. Traffic on I-395 had been heavy, and Emmett had sat in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He'd thought about turning around 3 times. This wasn't going to end well. He knew that. But he had to try. He had to get to Colonel Morrison. There were questions that needed answers. Questions that had been haunting him for 6 years. Questions about a mission that officially never happened. A mission where 23 men went in and only 4 came out. Judge Harold Brennan was 65 years old, gray-haired, wearing wire-rimmed glasses. He had served on this bench for over 20 years, and very few things challenged his authority. Today, he didn't expect any challenges either. The case seemed simple enough. Emmett Vance was charged with attempted unauthorized entry onto a military installation. Security personnel had stopped him at the gate of Fort Belvoir, asked for identification, and when he couldn't provide valid authorization, they turned him away. Emmett had insisted. He'd raised his voice. Security had called the military police. Emmett had been detained for 4 hours in a small concrete room with no windows, sitting on a metal bench, staring at a wall. They'd asked him questions. Why are you here? Who are you trying to see? What's your business on this base? Emmett had given them nothing. Just his name, rank, and service number. Old habits. Now he sat in this courtroom, wearing a simple gray button-down shirt and dark jeans. Around his neck, visible above his collar, hung 2 metal dog tags on a steel ball chain. They weren't shiny. They looked worn, scratched, like they'd been through hell and back. Most people in the courtroom had noticed them. A few whispered. One woman in the front row, a legal assistant, had leaned over to her colleague and said, "Why is he still wearing those?" Her colleague had shrugged. Maybe he's one of those guys who can't let go. But they didn't understand. Emmett wasn't holding on to the past. The past was holding on to him. Judge Brennan called the court to order at 9 a.m. sharp. The United States versus Emmett Vance. Mr. Vance, you are representing yourself today. Is that correct? Emmett stood slowly. His knees ached. Too many jumps. Too many forced marches. Too many nights sleeping on rocks in places that didn't exist on maps. Yes, Your Honor. His voice was calm, steady, respectful, the kind of voice that came from years of taking orders and giving them. Very well. The charge is attempted unauthorized access to a restricted military facility. How do you plead? Emmett paused for just a second. He knew what the smart move was. Plead guilty, pay a fine, walk away. But walking away had never been his style. Not guilty, Your Honor. A few people in the courtroom shifted in their seats. The prosecutor, a young woman named Rachel Winters, looked up from her notes with mild surprise. She'd expected a guilty plea. Most cases like this ended quickly with a fine and probation. This one should have been over in 15 minutes. Judge Brennan nodded. Very well. Ms. Winters, you may proceed. Rachel Winters stood and approached the bench. She was 32, sharp, efficient. She'd handled dozens of cases like this. Low-level security violations, disorderly conduct on federal property, trespassing. Easy wins. Your Honor, the facts are straightforward. On September 14th, at approximately 2:15 p.m., the defendant approached the main gate of Fort Belvoir and attempted to enter without proper authorization. When stopped by security, he became agitated and refused to leave. Military police were called, and the defendant was detained. Security footage confirms the incident. She handed a folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Brennan reviewed the documents. Emmett watched him. The judge's face was neutral, professional. He'd seen 1,000 cases like this, maybe more. Mr. Vance, do you dispute any of these facts? Emmett remained standing. No, Your Honor. I was there. I did try to enter, but I had a reason. The judge looked up. A reason? Please explain. Emmett took a breath. I was trying to reach the office of Colonel James Morrison. I needed to speak with him. It was urgent. Rachel Winters frowned. Your Honor, the defendant had no appointment, no clearance, and no valid reason to access a secure facility. His claim of urgency doesn't justify bypassing established security protocols. Fort Belvoir is home to sensitive operations and classified projects. We can't allow civilians to simply walk in because they feel something is urgent. Judge Brennan nodded. I tend to agree, Ms. Winters. Mr. Vance, if you needed to speak with Colonel Morrison, why didn't you schedule an appointment through proper channels? Emmett's jaw tightened. This was the part he'd been dreading. I tried, Your Honor. For 3 months, I tried. Emails, phone calls, written requests sent through official military channels. Every single one was ignored. Rachel Winters stood again. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant's frustration doesn't give him the right to— Judge Brennan raised a hand. Ms. Winters, I'll decide what's relevant. Mr. Vance, what was so urgent that you felt the need to bypass military protocol? Emmett looked down at his dog tags. His fingers moved toward them, then stopped. He could feel the weight of the metal, the weight of memory, the weight of 23 names that nobody wanted to say out loud. Your Honor, I can't explain that in open court. The room went quiet. Not just quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that happens when people don't know whether to be shocked or amused. Judge Brennan's expression hardened. You can't explain, or you won't? Emmett met his eyes. I can't, sir. It's classified. A few people in the courtroom chuckled. Nervous laughter. The kind of laughter that comes when someone says something ridiculous and you're not sure if they're serious. Rachel Winters shook her head slightly, as if she'd just heard the weakest defense of her career. Judge Brennan removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked tired, suddenly. Mr. Vance, I've been a judge for over 2 decades. I've heard every excuse, every deflection, every attempt to avoid accountability. And I have to tell you, it's classified is one of the oldest tricks in the book. Your Honor, Emmett interrupted, his voice firm but respectful. I'm not deflecting. What I need to discuss with Colonel Morrison involves information that is above your clearance level. And mine. That's why I need to speak with him directly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Judge Brennan's expression shifted from annoyance to something closer to disbelief. Above my clearance level? Mr. Vance, do you understand how absurd that sounds? I'm a federal judge. I have access to classified information on a regular basis. Emmett didn't flinch. Yes, sir, I do understand. But what I'm talking about isn't just classified. It's buried. Erased. Officially, it doesn't exist. Rachel Winters approached the bench, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Your Honor, I move to strike the defendant's testimony as non-responsive and irrelevant. This is clearly a stalling tactic. Mr. Vance is attempting to use vague claims of national security to avoid taking responsibility for his actions. Judge Brennan nodded slowly. I'm inclined to agree. Mr. Vance, unless you can provide a legitimate reason for your actions, something concrete, something verifiable, I'm prepared to find you in contempt and sentence you accordingly. Emmett stood perfectly still. His breathing was steady. His hands weren't shaking. But inside, something was breaking. 6 years. 6 years of silence. 6 years of carrying names that nobody wanted to remember. 6 years of watching the world move on while 23 ghosts followed him everywhere he went. Your Honor, Emmett said quietly, I understand your position, and I respect it, but I can't give you what you're asking for. Not here, not now. Judge Brennan leaned back in his chair. Then we have a problem, Mr. Vance. He paused. His eyes dropped again to Emmett's dog tags. For the first time, he seemed to actually look at them. Not just glance, but look. Study them. Mr. Vance, the judge said slowly, those dog tags. Why are you wearing them in my courtroom? Emmett's hand moved to his chest, fingers brushing the metal. They belonged to my team, Your Honor. I wear them to remember. Judge Brennan frowned. Your team? Emmett nodded. Yes, sir. I served with the 5th Special Forces Group. These tags are from men I served with, men who didn't make it home. The judge's expression softened, just slightly, just enough to show that somewhere beneath the robe and the authority, there was still a human being. I see. And that's admirable, Mr. Vance. Truly. But this is a federal courtroom, not a memorial service. Those dog tags, while meaningful to you, are not appropriate attire for these proceedings. I'm going to have to ask you to remove them. Emmett's hand tightened around the tags. He could feel his pulse quickening. Your Honor, with respect, I'd rather not. Judge Brennan's tone hardened instantly. The softness was gone. That wasn't a request, Mr. Vance. It was an order. Remove them. Now. The courtroom went completely silent. Every eye was on Emmett. The legal assistant stopped typing. Rachel Winters froze mid-step. The bailiff's hand moved slightly closer to his belt. Emmett stood there, his hand still holding the dog tags, his jaw set. He didn't move. Judge Brennan leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. Mr. Vance, if you refuse a direct order from this court, I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand what that means? I can have you arrested right now. I can send you to jail for 30 days. I can fine you. I can make your life very difficult. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Remove those dog tags. Emmett's voice was quiet but steady. I understand, Your Honor. But he still didn't move. His hand stayed where it was, wrapped around the metal, around the names, around the promise he'd made 6 years ago in a desert that didn't exist, to men who were never supposed to die. The tension in the room was suffocating. You could feel it pressing down on everyone, making it hard to breathe. Rachel Winters looked between the judge and Emmett, uncertain whether to intervene or stay silent. The bailiff took a step forward, waiting for the order. And then, from the back of the courtroom, a door opened. The sound was loud in the silence. Everyone turned. A man stepped inside. He was in his late 50s, wearing a crisp army dress uniform. The dark green jacket was perfectly pressed, every ribbon in place, every crease sharp enough to cut. Silver eagles gleamed on his shoulders. Colonel. His face was weathered, lined with years of command and hard decisions. His posture was perfect, spine straight, shoulders back. He moved with the kind of quiet authority that made people step aside without being asked, without even thinking about it. Judge Brennan looked up, startled. Excuse me, this is a closed proceeding. You can't just walk in here. The colonel didn't stop. He walked directly toward the bench, his boots echoing on the floor. Your Honor, my name is Colonel James Morrison, United States Army. I apologize for the interruption, but I need to speak. His voice was calm, controlled, but there was steel underneath. The kind of voice that had ordered men into combat and expected to be obeyed. Judge Brennan's eyes widened slightly. Colonel Morrison? The same Colonel Morrison that Mr. Vance was trying to contact. The colonel nodded once. Yes, sir. And I need to ask you, respectfully, not to make Mr. Vance remove those dog tags. The room erupted in whispers. People leaned toward each other, confused, intrigued. Rachel Winters stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The colonel has no standing in this case, no authority to— Judge Brennan raised his hand for silence. The whispers stopped immediately. Colonel, with all due respect, I don't take orders in my courtroom. I don't care what your rank is or what uniform you're wearing. If you have something to say about this case, you can submit a formal statement through the proper channels. But you cannot simply walk in here and tell me how to run my court. Colonel Morrison stepped closer to the bench. He didn't look angry. He looked tired and worried. Your Honor, I'm not giving you an order. I would never presume to do that. I'm making a request, a personal request, and I'm asking you to trust me when I say that what's engraved on those dog tags is not something that should be read aloud in this room, or any room. Judge Brennan stared at him for a long moment. What do you mean? Colonel Morrison glanced at Emmett. Their eyes met. A silent conversation passed between them. Years of shared history, shared pain, shared secrets. Then Morrison looked back at the judge. I mean that those dog tags contain information related to a classified operation. An operation that is still active, still sensitive, and still protected under federal law. If Mr. Vance removes them and anyone in this room sees what's written on them, it could compromise national security. The whispers grew louder. Judge Brennan held up a hand again. Colonel, are you seriously telling me that a simple set of dog tags worn by a civilian in a public courtroom pose a threat to national security? Colonel Morrison's expression didn't change. I'm telling you that they're not simple, Your Honor. And yes, they do. Judge Brennan sat back in his chair. He looked at Emmett, then at Colonel Morrison, then at the dog tags hanging around Emmett's neck. For the first time since the hearing began, he looked uncertain. Colonel, I need more than that. I need something concrete, something that justifies what you're asking me to do. Colonel Morrison nodded. I understand, Your Honor, and I can give you that. But I need to show you privately. Judge Brennan frowned. Privately? Colonel, I can't just clear my courtroom based on… Morrison's voice dropped lower, more urgent. Your Honor, please. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't absolutely necessary. There was a long pause. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Finally, Judge Brennan sighed. He looked exhausted suddenly, like the weight of the decision was physically pressing down on him. Everyone except Mr. Vance, Colonel Morrison, and myself, please step outside. This will only take a moment. Rachel Winters looked like she wanted to argue. Her mouth opened, then closed. The judge's tone left no room for debate. Your Honor, I really think… Ms. Winters, please. Outside. Now. The courtroom slowly emptied. The bailiff hesitated, but Judge Brennan nodded toward the door. You too, Tom. I'll be fine. The bailiff left reluctantly. The legal assistants, the few spectators who'd been curious enough to attend a minor trespassing case, all filed out into the hallway. The heavy wooden door closed with a soft thump. And then there were three. Judge Brennan, Colonel Morrison, and Emmett Vance. Silence. Judge Brennan removed his glasses and set them on the bench. All right, Colonel. You have my attention. What exactly am I about to see? Colonel Morrison reached for the dog tags, then paused. Your Honor, before I show you this, I need your word that what you're about to learn stays in this room. No records, no transcripts, no notes. The judge frowned. Colonel, I can't promise. Please, Your Honor, your word. Judge Brennan looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You have it. Morrison turned to Emmett. May I? Emmett hesitated. These dog tags hadn't left his body in 6 years. He'd worn them through thunderstorms, through sleepless nights, through moments when he'd considered throwing them into the Potomac River and walking away from everything. But he'd never taken them off. Not once. His hands moved to the back of his neck. He unclasped the chain. The metal felt strange in his hands, lighter somehow, now that it wasn't around his neck. He handed them to Colonel Morrison. Morrison held them carefully, as if they were made of glass. He turned to Judge Brennan and extended his hand. Your Honor. The judge took the dog tags. He turned them over in his palm, studying them. At first, his expression didn't change. Professional curiosity. Nothing more. Then his eyes focused on the engraving, and everything stopped. His face went pale. His hand started to tremble. Not much, just a slight shake, but enough to notice. He looked up at Emmett, eyes wide, then at Colonel Morrison. This is real? Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. Judge Brennan set the dog tags down on the bench, as if they were burning his hand. He removed his glasses again and pressed his fingers against his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was unsteady. How many people know about this? Morrison's jaw tightened. Fewer than 10, Your Honor. And it needs to stay that way. The judge looked at Emmett, really looked at him, not as a defendant, not as a trespasser, but as something else entirely. Mr. Vance, why are you wearing these? Emmett's voice was quiet. Because someone has to remember, Your Honor. Someone has to carry the weight. Someone has to make sure they're not forgotten. Judge Brennan sat back in his chair. He looked older now, tired. The authority was gone. What was left was just a man trying to process something he never should have learned. Colonel, why wasn't I informed about this before the hearing? Morrison's expression hardened. Because I didn't know Mr. Vance was going to be here, sir. I only found out this morning when my aide saw his name on a court docket. I drove here as fast as I could. The judge stared at the dog tags again. What operation was this? Colonel Morrison shook his head. I can't tell you that, Your Honor. And with all due respect, you don't want to know. There was a long silence. Finally, Judge Brennan picked up his gavel. He held it for a moment, then set it down without using it. Mr. Vance, I owe you an apology. I had no idea what you were carrying, what you've been carrying. Emmett's expression didn't change. You couldn't have known, Your Honor. Nobody can. The judge nodded slowly. Colonel Morrison, I assume you're here to vouch for Mr. Vance. Morrison straightened to attention. Yes, sir. Whatever he was trying to do at Fort Belvoir, he had a reason. A legitimate reason. I take full responsibility for not being available when he tried to reach me. That's on me, not him. Judge Brennan exhaled slowly. Very well. I'm dismissing this case. All charges dropped. Mr. Vance, you're free to go. Emmett didn't move. Your Honor, I still need to speak with Colonel Morrison, privately, about the operation. The judge looked at the colonel, who nodded. We'll talk, Emmett. I promise. Tonight. Judge Brennan stood. Then this court is adjourned. He picked up the dog tags carefully and handed them back to Emmett. Their eyes met. Mr. Vance, thank you for your service. And I'm sorry. For all of it. Emmett took the dog tags and placed them back around his neck. The metal settled against his chest, familiar and heavy. He didn't say anything. Words felt inadequate, hollow. Colonel Morrison placed a hand on Emmett's shoulder as they walked toward the door. Before they left, Morrison turned back to the judge. Your Honor, what you saw on those tags. Judge Brennan raised a hand, cutting him off. I didn't see anything, Colonel. And I never will. Morrison nodded once. Thank you, sir. The courtroom doors opened. The crowd filed back in, confused and whispering. Rachel Winters approached the bench immediately, but Judge Brennan had already gathered his files and was leaving through the side door. She turned to her assistant, bewildered. What just happened? The assistant shrugged. I have no idea, but whatever it was something big. Outside the courthouse, Emmett and Colonel Morrison stood on the steps. The Virginia sun was bright, almost blinding after the dim courtroom. Traffic moved steadily on Duke Street. Distant sirens wailed. Life continued, indifferent and constant. Morrison looked at Emmett. You should have called me directly. Emmett shook his head. I tried, sir. Every day for 3 months. You never answered. Morrison's expression softened. I know. I'm sorry. Things have been complicated. There's been pressure from the Pentagon. Questions being asked, files being reviewed. I had to keep my distance. Emmett stared at the street, watching cars pass. Normal people living normal lives. They're going to find out eventually. You know that, right? Someone's going to start digging. Someone's going to ask the wrong questions. Morrison nodded slowly. Maybe, but not today. And not if I can help it. Emmett's hand moved to the dog tags again. A reflex. A habit. How many of us are left, sir? Morrison's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Including you? 4. Emmett closed his eyes. The sun was warm on his face, but he felt cold inside. 4. Out of 23. Morrison didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. They both knew the cost. They'd both paid it. And they were still paying. After a long moment, Emmett spoke again. I need to know what happened to Sergeant Hale, sir. I need to know the truth. Morrison's jaw tightened. Emmett, you know I can't. I need to know, Emmett said, his voice firm. He was my friend. He saved my life twice. He deserves more than a classified file and a name nobody can speak. He deserves the truth. Morrison looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay. Meet me at the Jefferson Memorial tomorrow evening. 1800 hours. I'll tell you what I can. Emmett nodded. Thank you, sir. Morrison turned to leave, then stopped. Emmett, those dog tags. You should keep them safe. Don't wear them out in the open like this. It's dangerous. Emmett's hand closed around the metal. I wear them because I promised, sir. I promised them I'd remember. That somebody would. Morrison's eyes softened. I know. Just be careful. Emmett nodded. Always am, sir. Colonel Morrison walked down the courthouse steps and disappeared into a waiting black sedan with government plates. The car pulled away smoothly, merging into traffic. Emmett stood there for a few more minutes, watching the world move around him. People walked past, lawyers in suits, families holding hands, strangers absorbed in their phones. None of them knew. None of them would ever know. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that was how it had to be. Because some stories aren't meant to be told. Some names aren't meant to be spoken. Some sacrifices are honored in silence, carried by the few who remain. Emmett Vance turned and walked down the street. The sun was warm. The dog tags clinked softly with each step, a rhythm he'd long since stopped noticing. And somewhere, in a file buried deep in a government archive, locked behind doors that required clearances most people didn't know existed, 23 names waited in the dark, forgotten by most, remembered by few, carried by one.